Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 17th Byte-Size Talk. I'd like to start, as always, by thanking the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative for funding the series of talks so far, and you, the NF Core community, for your continued engagement. Please reach out to us if you have ideas for future talks in this series. We're currently scheduling the next batch, so we would love to hear from you. The talk today will focus on defining what pytest workflows are and how to test NF Core modules and pipelines. And we have Edmund Miller from the University of Texas in Dallas in the US presenting. Thanks for joining us, Edmund, especially considering how early in the morning it is for you. If you have any questions for Edmund during the talk today, please keep them coming through the chat box on Zoom or on YouTube, and I will read them out at the end. So without further ado, over to you, Edmund. We are looking forward to your talk.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the intro. So let's get started with pytest workflow. So an overview of what we're going to cover first is pytest workflow and how we use it in NF Core modules. We're going to duck behind the curtains of the CI and understand how that works with the modules and how some of that is automated and generalized. And then we're also going to talk about running pytest workflow on NF Core modules locally as well, in case you have a lot of changes. And then lastly, we're going to get a little sneak peek at testing pipelines with pytest workflow as well and what's coming in the future, hopefully. So first, pytest workflow, just kind of an intro to what it is and why we're using it. So writing workflows is really difficult, and that's why we're all here in a community called NF Core. And so testing if they're correct is even harder as well. And that's another difficulty. And so testing bash scripts or other code has some flaws in it. Like what are you going to use to test it? Is the bug in the pipeline or is it in the test framework? And so before we just use CI and just running the commands manually, and that's just checking to see whether the pipeline even passes and doesn't end with an error. And so pytest workflow's catchphrase here is pytest workflow aims to make testing as simple as possible so you can focus on debugging your pipeline. And so how we use it in NF Core modules, and some benefits before we get into that, that we get to use then, we can then version control and collaborate on our tests that we're running on modules and pipelines. We can use cool things like git bisect on them as well to find what commit broke something. This allows us to have increase the reproducibility of our tests as well. And it also allows us to run the test locally quickly without trying to copy commands from a CI file and convert them from GitHub Actions quirks to then local quirks as well. And it allows new users and reduces our learning curve in testing actual modules as well. So this is the quick anatomy of what a pytest workflow test looks like. And if you're not familiar, pytest is a very popular testing framework for the Python language. Pytest workflow is a plugin for that that then picks up special YAML files in the test directory, and that's what this is what those YAML files look like. So first, you have the name of the test, and you can give it whatever name you like that describes it. Then you have the command that's going to be ran. So in this case, in the example test, it's just going to run touch test.file, and then it's going to check for the file after that command is ran in the path test.file, and the test will fail if that file isn't there, or if the test doesn't exit with a 0 exit code. You can also specify what exit code it should have, so we can have things like tests that should fail because we're testing for checks in that, and various other things. And I suggest that you look at the docs more in depth for some cool things that you can do on that. And so first, let's go through an example of gunzip, or as one of the undergrads that I mentor likes to call it, gunzip. This is straight from the NF Core modules, and so you can reference that later. So we just have our name, we have our command here, which is nextflow run, and then we're changing to the directory that is for gunzip. And then we're just going to use an entry point in the test file. And so there's a main.nf in each test. And those just have simple little Nextflow scripts that call the modules and then run them based on that, and have some outputs with the test data in the talk that Kevin gave last week. Refer to that, please. And then we're just going to use the config in the test config. And so these tags here also are important. So we can tag the tests with different things. So for likegunzip here, and we'll get into how we use that in the CI later and how you can use that locally. And then the other cool thing about this one is you can also MD5 sum the outputs, and that allows us, that is a cryptographic hash of the file. And so what it's doing also is it's checking for the integrity of the file every time that it runs the test as well. So then we can confirm that these are reproducible and we're doing the same thing over and over again. So luckily, you don't have to know how to do any of that. You just need to know NF core modules create test YAML that the tools people have created for us. And so this automates the creation of the YAML file and the MD5 sums for you as well. It also runs the test for you for the first time. And all you have to do is just write the test in Nextflow. So if you know Nextflow, you can write the tests. And so this is just an example of how it would, the flow that it would do. So first we would write we would put a test file in there for us. So this is the star align test workflow. And this is just a main.nf in the test directory. You can go refer to the NF core modules as well for this. And so as you can see, we're just importing those modules. And then we can have different parameters as well and whatnot. And then we're using the test data that Kevin talked about last week. And then we're just running the workflows, very plain and simple in Nextflow land. And so then we're just going to call NF core modules create test YAML. And so it's going to prompt you for a couple things. So you need to add some default values like star align, where you want the test YAML output path. It comes up with some defaults based on what you feed it anyways, as you can see in the parentheses here. So hitting enter will probably be good. And then it's going to look for the test workflow entry points as well, as you can see. And so it's going to pick those up automatically. And then it's going to create a test name for you that follows our standardization practices. And then it's going to come up with a test command for you. The test tags, and you can also change any of these, add to them. You can also just go in and edit the YAML manually as well afterwards. And then it'll also ask you for the test output folders. And then as you can see, and then it'll run the test here and run them with that command. And then it'll hash the files for you and output those. And then as you can see, it'll also pick up any other tests that you've written. So you can write multiple tests for it as well. You don't have to just stick with one. I just used one for the example. Okay, so let's peek behind the curtains of the CI. So there's a couple pieces to it. So luckily GitHub Actions has a beautiful way of working together, and we can reuse other people's code and actions that they've created. So we're using the Dorney paths filter action, and that checks just for the changes that have happened in the PR and in the pushes. And so that allows us to only test things that have changed in the code and not test for everything every time something is pushed, because we're running a lot of workflows. And so based on these changes, we then create a matrix of the jobs. And then the tests are also ran on Singularity, Docker, and Conda based on the matrix. And then in and then we run pytest workflow and linting against those tags that we pick up in the first step. And so on the failures, the logs also get uploaded as well, so that you can refer to them and we can all download them and look at them and see why they're failing. So this is the part that is checking for changes here in the CI. That's it. That's the simplicity of it. The filters part is what I want to draw your attention to, of the test config pytest software.yaml. So this is something else that you need to edit when you're adding new modules. And so you just go in there and you add in the tag that you want to use. And so this is the same tag as you saw in our earlier example in *align or /align. And as you can see, what it's doing here is it's saying pick up anything on this path based on that and using a wildcard. So anything on software *align it's going to run these tests and anything that is on test software star line. So if we're making any changes to the module or we're making any changes to the tests, we're going to rerun these tests. And so the matrix here, and my one emoji for the entire presentation. So we support the current Nextflow version. We can support other Nextflow versions in the future if need be, based on that. That's why that's still in there, but we're only supporting the current stable version right now. Then it passes the tags from the first step based on the check for changes, and then it creates them based off of a profile. So we're basically multiplying each of these by how many they are, and the tags one is variable as to how many tags there are. And so that's created a problem for us in the past, that if we create more than 256 jobs, the GitHub Actions kicks us off and doesn't run them because the matrix is too large. I've tried some preliminary stuff to alleviate this and basically stop it before it gets to 256 and just run all the tests. But I haven't gotten those to work yet because the GitHub Actions are finicky currently. If anyone has any ideas, that's a link to the issue as well. Okay, so, and then we're going to run the tests. And this is how simple the end of the CI is. We do a bunch of setup before that of installing Python, installing pytest-workflow, installing Nextflow, and then installing the profile based on what the profile in the matrix is. And so all that it's doing here is setting the temp directory for singularity, and then it's going to just call pytest-workflow. And then as you can see, we use the matrix tags here. And so that's going to run back through each time and run it with different tags. And then the symlink portion, for whatever reason, with the modules, we need to symlink them. And the keep working directory of failed is an important part. So it deletes any working directory that doesn't fail so that we clean up space afterwards automatically. And so then any logs that fail here, we then upload them as well. So we upload the .nextflow log, we upload the log.out and the log.error, and those are just pytest-workflow niceties that capture the standard out and the standard error for the workflow that's running. And then we also upload the work directory, and sometimes that gets a little too large and you can't view it all. So you may have to run that locally if you want to dig deeper into it. And then the logs are just named based off of the matrix as well. And then we also lint the modules. That's using the same concept of checking for any changes. And then the NF core modules lint, and then we only run that on the tags of those modules to save CI time. Okay, let's cover how to run pytest-workflow locally as well. It's really simple to get up and running with that. All you need to do is conda install pytest-workflow. You can refer to the pytest-workflow docs if you'd like to do anything else fancier with how to do that. You can install with pip and other utilities as well. And then all you're going to do is pick a profile. In this case, this one's Docker. You can use Singularity or Conda also, depending on what you want to run. And then you just call your tag of whatever modules you're working on, and it'll pick up all the tests for those. You can also use the name of the test as the tag. You just put quotes around it, and it counts as a tag as well. And then we're going to need symlink in there for running it on the modules. And then you can also change the base temp. So usually it puts it under /tmp, but maybe we want it underneath our scratch directory and not in that local space. And so this is a little sneak preview as to what's coming in the future. I'm getting close to my time here, so I might fly through this. So we're testing pipelines with pytest-workflow as well. So then we can verify the expected outputs and their integrity, and this has been a long-standing issue. The CI can be generalized so that we're not running, so it's not so complicated. Our logic isn't in the CI, our logic is actually in the test locally, and that reduces our necessity on GitHub as a platform and allows us to be more decentralized in the future as well. If need be. We can also only test sections of the pipelines that have changes. We don't have to test the entirety of the whole thing. For example, if you make a change in a sub workflow, we can just test that. And we're going to save the GitHub runners and not waste CI hours or time waiting for CI to run as well and waiting for those green checks. And so then we can also have finer grained testing of sub workflows and modules as well that are local and share the same benefits. So here's some example PRs for anyone that's interested in that, in the Sarik pipeline and the RNA-seq pipeline. If you'd like to implement that in your pipeline, feel free to reach out on Slack and I can definitely help, or Maxime can. And so this is an end-to-end example. That's what people in web development like to call testing that tests the entire application. And so as you can see, this is just a quick example from the RNA-seq pipeline of running the default pipeline based on that. And so we have the Nextflow run main.nf, and we're just calling the profile with test and Docker. And this is just what's in the CI if you ever peeked in there. The difference is that we can also then tag it with default, and maybe we have some other default tests as well, like the SRA download, for example, but that one's probably moved out now that that's its own pipeline. And then we can have the different files that we expect the outputs to be in here as well. And that's where we really start to get the power and the added benefit from the added complexity of PyTest workflows. Then we can verify our outputs. And I picked examples that didn't have MD5 hashes, but we can hash those then and verify the reproducibility. And so then we can do things like test a sub workflow as well. And this is just an example from the Sarik pipeline. And so as you can see, we can then input different options, and then so we can start testing various options with your sub workflows. And this actually, the added benefit of the complexity is then you don't have to run the entirety of the pipeline and wait for Nextflow to spin up with these large data sets. You can just test your sub workflow and work on those, and then plug it in at the end to the entirety of the pipeline when you want to test it. And it makes for a really quick local development workflow. And so then we can, this is what it would look like for testing a sub workflow. And my slide got kind of weird here, but that actually worked out really well. And so as you can see, it's just calling, it's similar to how it's running in the NF core modules and using the entries. And then we have various tags. And so then we can use that down here to run these tags based off of the changes. And as you can see, these are set to pick up anything in the mark duplicates tests in the sub workflow file. If that has any changes, this test is going to run. And if anything changes in the NF core module, which is also nice, when we start updating modules and dealing with those, you'll want to rerun your test to make sure that the new version works. And of course, we can have our expected outputs up here as well. And that's it. I'll take any questions.
Thanks very much, Edmund. Are there any questions? Please put them in the chat and I can read them out. All right, I don't see any coming up right now. So let's thank our speaker today. We've already shared the slides on the website, and we'll be sharing the transcripts of the talk as well. So please stay tuned and watch out for them. We will have our last talk before the summer break next week. So join us for a presentation on development environments and workflows by Maxime Garcia. As I mentioned earlier, we're currently scheduling the next set of talks for autumn. So reach out to us if you have any ideas. We would love to hear from you. So on that note, thanks again and see you next week. Phil has a question. Okay.
Go for it, Phil.
Hey, sorry. Just a very quick one. I was thinking about you had a link to an issue. I haven't read it yet. I just opened it while you were talking about reducing the complexity of the matrix. And one of the things I came across recently when I was playing with something similar is an option in GitHub Actions I've only seen recently, where you can have basically exceptions to the matrix. And I wondered if you knew about that or had played with that at all.
No, I haven't played with that.
I think it's called include and exclude or something like that.
Okay.
So I used it on one of the other pipelines, so that you only do one of the tests with a different Nextflow version, and then all the other tests run with just one, so that you reduce the number of total tests.
Cool.
It was quite nice.
Anyway,
that was it. So, yeah.
Easy to
That was
say.
a really
Okay.
good talk. Thank you. I learned a lot. It's great.
Thank you. You're welcome.